The Lord be with you. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Ed Glaze, one of the pastors here at Boone United Methodist Church. And as we have you here tonight, we do so because our mission is to love our community, inviting all to discover life in Jesus Christ. And one of the ways we want to show love to the community is by presenting this material from this very powerful book called The Anxious Generation. And we all owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. St. Clair for many things, but he's the one that introduced this book to our staff and to me. And it's opened my eyes up to a lot of things that are going on in our society, particularly with our young people. And you who are here tonight are going to learn some incredible facts. It's going to be just the tip of the iceberg about all that's in the book and that material that's out there. But I hope it'll give you pause and seeing how we use these things that we have in our back pockets called our smartphones or digital devices. It's going to be something that I think will help us move forward as a community, as a congregation, and hopefully as a country in a more healthy manner in using digital technology. So I'm going to hush up and present Dr. Scott St. Clair, who many of you all know because he's the doctor of your kids, grandkids, or somebody that you love. So Scott, thank you for coming out tonight.
Well, guys, so great to be with you guys. Thank you for coming out tonight. As Ed said, I'm a pediatrician. I've been a pediatrician in the community for over 20 years now, so I do think I've had the experience of seeing how things have evolved with mental health in young people in our community, but also just the evolution of technology use over the last 20 years. So I'm bringing that perspective, but I'm also a parent of 3 kids who came through this church, did confirmation here, and were involved in different ways to this church. But my youngest is a sophomore in college, and so we also lived through a lot of this technological change. So the decisions around phones and social media and all of this is not a academic or professional exercise for me. I have lived it, I've done it, and I can feel the stresses and strains some of you guys may be feeling. So I hope that perspective as a parent and a pediatrician will be helpful to our discussion tonight. Our topic of conversation is the anxious generation, a conversation about phones, social media, and adolescent mental health, which we'll get to in a minute, but quick note just to say, this talk tonight is a talk that I have been giving to myself for the last 3 years, all right? So let me explain what I mean. I grew up loving reading, okay? If there was a book on sports or space at our local library, I read it. I loved reading, and I kept that love of reading going all the way through my medical training, even as we moved here and had young kids. As we got into the 2010s, I definitely noticed myself slowing down on how much I was actually reading. And I came up with a lot of justifications for why I was reading less. But most of those were just rationalizations for why I was reading less, but I definitely noticed this about myself. My oldest son came home from college December of 2021, and he asked me, he said, "Dad, have you ever read through the Bible in a year?" And I said, "Yeah, I have, but it's been a really long time." And he said, "Well, I think I'm going to do that." I said, "Well, if you do that, I'm definitely hopping on board, I'll do that." So January of 2022, I embarked on trying to get through several chapters of the Bible every single day, and I found it to be an incredible grind. I could not focus. I could barely remember what I read the day before, much less a week before, and my brain was actually felt like it was hurting. And I had a moment somewhere in January of 2022, so 3 years ago, where I just came to this realization: your use of technology is impacting your ability to read and focus and pay attention. And so for me, I've been on my own journey the last 3 years, which I hope sort of the undercurrents of that will show up in this presentation. So this is not a talk where I'm up on a thing talking down conversation with that I've been through myself. So let's get into it. Can you do the next slide? So here's what we're trying to do tonight. We're going to do a presentation on this book, The Anxious Generation. Pastor Ed Glaze is going to give you guys some information on it, some things we've been doing during the Lenten season on fasting from digital devices, trying to create some space from our devices so that we can grow in our spiritual lives. We're going to take a break, but then we're going to come back. In your tables are sort of going to be your small groups where we're going to discuss and have a Q&A because I know you guys are going to have questions. There's sort of only so much I can give you in the brief time I have, and so we're going to have a time for questions and some back and forth. So as things are coming up, mentally note those, write those down so you guys can discuss that, and then we're going to end with a quick word of prayer. Sam, next slide. All right, so this book, Anxious Generation, came out a year ago and has been right at the top of the New York Times bestseller list ever since. And I think when you look at the subtitle, how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness, really hit a nerve with people. And I think if you are in this room, the chance you know someone, a young person who's dealt with anxiety, depression, is really, really high. And I think all of us can realize the ways that our devices have just moved into every aspect of our life. And so I think the fact that this book has sparked such a conversation is just an indicator of what a hot topic this is for parents, for grandparents, for educators, whoever's working with young people. Jonathan Haidt is a social scientist at NYU, and he, in addition to being an academic, he's written several books for popular audiences. And I think the thing that I have really appreciated about Jonathan Haidt, he describes himself as a Jewish agnostic. I've heard him describe himself in that way in multiple interviews. But he has a deep and abiding respect for religious and faith communities. That's the reason we're discussing this book here at church. There's actually a chapter in the book on the ways that our devices are blocking our spiritual experiences, and we'll get to that. But he spends an entire chapter in the book talking about that. So let's hop in there. Sam? All right. So it feels like smartphones have been around for forever. But when I moved here in 2002, this did not exist. So 2007, the iPhone gets introduced, and it definitely changes the way we interact with the internet because it's walking around with us in our pocket everywhere we go. A couple years later, like and share buttons get introduced. And that fundamentally changes the internet as well. So instead of a place where you're getting information and connecting, we're moving into more of issues around virality, engagement, and that just changes how we use online material and engage with the internet. The next year, front-facing cameras, selfies become a thing. And the internet, as opposed to being a show that you are watching, is now a show that you are participating in. So that, again, fundamentally changes the nature of the internet. 2 years later, Facebook buys Instagram, it's introduced, and we were off to the races, okay? So 2010 to 2015, Jonathan Haidt calls the Great Rewiring. And by the end of 2015, the majority of teenagers have a smartphone with them wherever they go. And devices sort of insinuated themselves into all the spaces of our lives for us, but also for our kids. And he says that during that time, the Great Rewiring, it just fundamentally changed the nature of growing up and being a teenager. And it's had some pretty significant effects, and I'm going to show you some of what he talks about. Next slide, Sam. All right. Let me just sort of walk you through this slide, but I do think it's really, really important. On the bottom is years going through, and he has in gray the years 2010 to the years 2015, which he calls the Great Rewiring. And on the left is the percentage of young people who are dealing with different mental health challenges. The blue line is anxiety and the orange is depression, but you can see something clearly starts to move in 2010, 2015. And from 2015 to today, it has been a steady increase in both anxiety and depression that has shown no signs of slowing down. And just from my work as a pediatrician, I can tell you this is absolutely what I've seen and experienced in my private practice. This is a large part of what I end up taking care of that I wasn't taking care of when I started 20 years ago. So what's underlying this? Sam, can you do the next slide? I'm gonna linger here on the slide. So if you could take one thing away from tonight, this would be it. As the teacher would say, this will be on the test. This is it right here. So this is the main thesis for the whole book. Overprotection of kids in the real world, combined with underprotecting kids in our digital spaces, has led to a mental health crisis for Gen Z and for those born after 2010, Gen Alpha. So I think you can restate it a little bit differently to say we tend to overestimate the risks to our kids in the real world. And out of a good desire to protect them, we overprotect them. But on the other side, we tend to underestimate the risk for them in the digital space, and therefore we underprotect them in the digital world. And the combination of those two things is what he would argue has led to that huge rise in anxiety and depression that we're seeing in young people. Another way he phrases it, one more thing, thanks Sam, the phone-based, play-based to phone-based childhood is another way to do this. This is sort of his shorthand, and childhood is his shorthand for childhood and adolescence. And phone-based is not just phones, although it certainly includes phones, but phones for him is a shorthand for any device that connects to the internet. So phones are it, tablets are it, gaming systems are it, laptops are it, our televisions are it. So if you just think about all the devices that connect to the internet that have now become part of your life, they've also become part of the lives of all of our kids. And we've moved from childhood being predominantly a place where you are learning to experience the real world to you're experiencing the world through screens and devices. And that just fundamentally changes the nature of what it means to grow up and be a kid and grow up to be a teenager and then eventually to grow up to be an adult. Next slide, Sam. So taking that major premise apart, he spends a whole chapter on what he calls the 4 foundational harms of phones, and again, of devices connected to the internet. And we're going to spend a minute going over each one of these, because I think if you haven't come to this topic yet, these 4 things I think are really helpful to understand why phones and internet-connected devices are causing such trouble. I mean, we've got a sense that it's causing trouble, but he lays out some really good data as to why that is. And so the 4 big ones are social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. So we're gonna go through each one of those. Sam, next slide. All right. So this first slide is daily average time that people spend with friends. And this is friends outside of school, okay? So on the bottom horizontal line is again years, and you can see 2010 to 2015 is grayed out for you, what he calls the Great Rewiring. And it's on the left, on the vertical axis, there's the minutes per day that people spend with friends outside of the school setting. And you can see that blue line is 15 to 24-year-olds. So this is teenagers, early young adults. And you can see even some changes before 2010 to 2015, but in 2010 to 2015, you start seeing a dramatic decrease in the amount of time kids spend in person with other friends. And you can see from 2015 till now, it's dropped off significantly. So part of the initial thing is you look on there and go, wow, COVID really impacted how much time kids were spending with their friends. You can't see it that far away, you're gonna have to trust me. But that big decrease you see there starts in 2018. So the significant decrease that kids are spending with friends predated the pandemic by 2 years. The pandemic just continued a trend that had already been going on for 2 years. So kids are spending significantly less time with friends, and that's the quantity. But if you think about the quality of time with friends, and you've been around people, young people, almost every social interaction is mediated by some degree by a device. And that just changes the fundamental nature of conversations and relationships. So both quantity and quality has changed pretty dramatically in the last decade. And you say, okay, well, why is that such a big deal? Well, if you think of human beings and your human identity as being bio, psycho, social, spiritual beings, and we remove that social aspect from kids, particularly young people are social creatures. They want to be with friends. We take that away from them during a time when they are trying to figure out who am I and who am I trying to become. It has pretty significant impacts on them. Next slide. All right, so sleep deprivation. I know there's this cliche about sleepy teens that's been around for forever, and there's definitely some physiologic reasons for that, and that's okay. I mean, like, sleepy teens is fine. I can just tell you from the medical side of things, the amount of sleep deprivation going on right now is different than what you might have thought about kids sleeping in on the weekends, okay? And I think this graph explains it pretty well. So on the bottom is years, and again, 2010, 2015 is that great rewiring. On the left, on the vertical, is the percentage of middle schooler and high schoolers who are getting less than 7 hours of sleep per night. So let me just frame that a little different way. This is the middle schoolers and high schoolers who are getting 6 hours of sleep per night, okay? So in our world, we recommend 8 to 9 hours of sleep. I would say someone getting 6 hours of sleep a night as being significantly sleep deprived. You can see that during the Great Rewiring, something dramatic has happened. It's affected girls more than boys, for sure, but it's affected both. But to the point now, if you connect with your average teenage girl, they are going to be sleep deprived. That line is over 50%. So why is that such a big deal? I've been influenced in my own thinking by a writer called Matthew Walker. He's a neuroscientist who specializes in sleep, and he wrote a book for popular audiences called Why We Sleep. If you want to read a little bit more about the sleep aspect of this, strongly recommend that book. But one of the frameworks he gives for helping people try to understand why is sleep so important is sleep is that time where our brains are resting and repairing themselves. Okay, big picture. And of course, teen brains growing and changing, and they need a lot of rest and repair. But I think the thing that was an aha moment for me was he describes your REM sleep, your rapid eye movement sleep, otherwise known as your dream sleep, as a nightly visit to a counselor. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you take people and put them into a sleep lab, so you can figure out what range of sleep they're in, and they're also in a functional MRI, so you can see what areas of their brain are lighting up. When you are in REM sleep and dream sleep, the areas in your brain that are lighting up are around emotion and memories, okay? And so that is the exact same spots in your brain that light up when you are undergoing therapy. You're trying to process, you're trying to reframe your experiences and your emotions in a way that you can package in there in some healthy way. Well, the exact same thing happens when you're in REM sleep. It's happening subconsciously, you don't know it's happening. But when you get sleep deprived, one of the very first things that goes away is your REM sleep. So as our youth are sleep deprived, it's not just that they're sleepy, okay? The brains are not having a chance to rest and restore themselves, and they're missing out on this really critical emotional rest that their body needs every night. Next slide, Slam. All right, number 3, attention fragmentation. If you are an adult in here and you are honest with yourself, you are not focusing and concentrating the same way you were 5 to 10 years ago. If you are, you're an incredible human being, because that was exactly what I was feeling at Christmas of 2021, that my ability to focus had. And we got pretty good data that the technology is significantly impairing our ability to stay focused on things. This is one small example. This was a study from University of Michigan and Common Sense Media that looked at the number of notifications that kids get in a day. 240 notifications on average. So you can imagine what our high users are getting. And basically what that means is during your waking hours, you're talking about 4 a notification every 4 minutes. And so, on average, kids are spending about 7 hours a day on their phone. But I think the thing that when you look at the studies and ask kids, over half of them say that they think about their phones constantly. So that the 7 hours is probably an underestimate, so that when they're away from their phone, they're thinking about their phone. And it's crowding out any ability for them to focus and pay attention to anything. Again, why is that a big deal? Your time as an adolescent is when you're trying to figure out who you are, what this world is about, and what you want to become. And in a world where you have no mental space to think, that becomes very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Next one. This is the last one. Addiction. A common definition we'll use in medicine for addiction is compulsive behavior that leads to painful and negative consequences. So most people can identify this with substances, okay? And that is certainly true. But you can see if you use that definition how devices can easily fall into that category. Compulsive, leading to negative consequences, which we've already covered several of them here. And then when you look at the main neurotransmitter, the chemical in your brain that's going on with chemical addiction is dopamine. That is the same chemical that's getting fired up every time we're using our devices. And that dopamine's involved in pleasure, it's involved in our experiences of pain, motivation, goal setting, and those same chemicals that are involved in chemical addiction, same thing that you see when we're using our devices. Ann Lemke, again, if you want to read some more about this aspect of this, she's a psychologist at Stanford, wrote a really good book called Dopamine Nation. He quotes her in this book as saying, "The smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. The universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria." So I think just a shorthand is the phones are dysregulating our ability to use our dopamine, and they're just one of the main ways our brains function in this world. So if you think about every time you're using that phone and you use it and you have a little bit of bump in your dopamine and it feels good, when you're away from your phone, it does this. We experience that as pain. Nobody likes pain. So to get out of the pain cycle, you got to go back. But the next time you got to go back, you got to have just a little bit extra to get to the same. And that's just happening all day long. Dopamine up, dopamine down, dopamine up, dopamine down, dopamine up. And I think one of the best metaphors I have heard for thinking about this is a wave pool at a water park. All right? So when they turn the wave machine on in the wave pool, highs, lows, highs, lows, highs, lows. But the other thing that's happening when you're doing the highs and lows is you've got water sloshing out of that pool. So by the time you turn the machine off, the water level in the pool is lower than it was when you started. And if you can think about kids using phones all day long, you're getting the highs and the lows, but at the end of the day, their dopamine levels are depleted. And it just has significant negative impact on how they're feeling about their life. Next slide. So I think the argument that he makes persuasively, in my opinion, particularly as somebody who deals with this every day, is when you take teenagers and you take them out of their social relationships, when you deprive them of sleep, when you keep them constantly distracted, when you dysregulate their dopamine, it is going to cause problems. And that's what we've seen in that data that we showed earlier. Next slide. All right. So I'm going to finish up my part and hand the phone over to Ed with this slide.
Phone?
Huh?
The phone?
Phone. Did I say phone? Freudian slip. Actually, I don't even hold mine. My wife's got mine down here, so I'm not even thinking about it.
You're addicted, Scott.
Exactly. The best way to stay away from your phone is to get away from your phone.
Yeah.
So I don't even have mine with me up here. So he's got a whole bunch of recommendations, but if he has 4 key recommendations, here's what they are. No smartphones before high school. Social media after the age of 16, phone-free schools, and I think he makes a really compelling case of bell-to-bell keeping phones out of schools, and then a play-based childhood. So I know that the list of these things create lots of emotions in lots of different people depending on where you are and what's going on with your kids. So I get that, but I think all of these are great aspirational goals, and I think in some ways, all of them have some level of achievement, individual families, okay? So you can make decisions about when you're doing smartphones, you can make decisions about social media, you can try to tell your kids to keep their devices in their backpacks while they're at school. You can try to have a play-based childhood, but all of those things, trying to do them on your own, are very, very difficult. They are so much easier when there are other people around you who are making similar decisions. And I think one of the things that Haidt says in his book, I did think he did this in a provocative way, was to say that a community that really embraced all four of these together, like as a collective action together, within 2 years would see pretty dramatic improvement in the mental health of the young people in their community. I don't know if that's true, but I like to think that that would be true, and I do think it's something that I know I would love to be a part of. I would love for our church to be a part of. I'd love for our community to continue to think about this, because I think all four of these recommendations are really, really good. I know people are going to have questions about these, so when we have Q&A, feel free to fire up the questions. But I'm going to hand it over to Ed as we go to the next slide, and I'm going to make one more comment. One of the ways he describes phones, which has been such a helpful thing for me, is experience blockers. Phones just block your ability to experience life going on around you. And one of the ways it does that is it blocks spiritual experiences. So I'm going to let Ed go through that. But I do think keeping in your mind the idea of these internet-connected devices blocking our ability to experience life in the real world is a great way to think about it. And here's 6 things that Haidt talks about that Ed's going to talk a little bit more with.
And Scott, you hit upon something that I think I remember from the there's a lot in the book, y'all, that the regions where the technology companies are centered and where many of the executives send their kids to school follow those practices. That should tell us something. That should tell us something. Yeah, we know that if you practice spiritual disciplines, you live a life in the Spirit, you do things that religious people do, you're going to be a lot healthier. In a book, How God Works, The Science Behind the Benefits of Religion, the author David DeSanto talks about these things, if we practice them in a religious setting, yes, but even in a secular setting, because Haidt is secular, you are going to be much more healthy mentally and physically as well. The first one is shared sacredness, time, place, doing things together. And, we share life together with other people. All societies throughout human history have developed rituals that draw them together. You look at the museums and you see even the Cro-Magnon man. They had rituals that brought them together, and that enabled them to have shared experiences, a shared life. They were able to do things together that identified who they were. We do better when we do things together. Think about it on the profane level of a sporting event. You can watch a game on television, and yeah, you might get a little thrilled, or you might get a little upset, like someone I know standing on stage here who watched the basketball game yesterday afternoon, but we'll go there. But it's sure a lot more thrilling when we are joined together with other people. And also when we share in a rhythm of life. We who are Christians and of Judeo-Christian communities believe that God created within the universe a rhythm, a pattern of things where we have times of activity and we pull aside for times of rest. In a phone-based society, it's 24/7. It's always going, always on. You can always pull it out, get connected to somebody in Hong Kong, Western Europe, find out almost anything you want to find out and then some. There are no boundaries there. There is no limits. and there's really no shared community except virtually. And we are meant to be eyeball to eyeball with other people. It blocks embodiment. We are meant to do things together, be together, share things together. And like with the rituals, we are meant to interact with other people. Again, on the profane level, both our kids went to a certain university, and at the orientation, the basketball coach of the losing team yesterday came to the football stadium and shared with all the students there the cheers, the war chants, the things that brought people together on campus at certain times, and the phrase that all of us that are of that persuasion know to say to each other when we see each other. That is embodiment together. Think about singing by yourself in the shower if some of y'all do that. All right? That might be an awful thing for some of us. Yeah, Ken's already laughing over there. Yeah, he's thinking about how bad it sounds in his shower. But think about when we do it with other people, and it draws us together when we listen to the voices of others. I'm going to start, and then you all join me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. We do that together so that when we're alone, we have those words resonating in our souls. Cell phone usage keeps us from experiencing things together. It keeps us from being empowered by one another. Stillness, focus. It is a proven fact that cell phone usage, as Scott talked about, keeps us from being able to focus in on that which is in front of us. Something pings in our pocket. We hear the little notification going off. We feel the buzz that's going on right now. And it keeps us from being truly present to where we are. All great religions, or almost all great religions, have practices that help us focus in, as we say in our tradition, the sacrament of the present moment. And when we take even just 10 minutes a day to focus in on what is going on in our own hearts, trying to connect to that which is greater than ourselves, that can help rewire our brains so that we are more resilient, we are calmer. It's proven that it lowers our blood pressure. It enables us to be able to handle the pressures of life more calmly and at peace. These things that my wife in here, so I couldn't give it to her. These things that we carry around with us keep us from doing that. They keep our minds whirling all the time on what's next. When I was on Instagram, my gosh, I watched so many Three Stooges videos. I mean, I kept going over and over. Oh, isn't that funny? I mean, I've spent lots of time looking at those things. And, did I care what was going on around me? My wife could be doing all sorts of things. Or kids could be doing stuff. No, I mean, it's Mo, Larry, Curly, and me right there on the phone. It gets us distracted, does it not? It keeps us from being still and focusing in upon what is there in front of us, what is really real, not what's on the phone. Transcending self. All great religions tell us that it ain't about me. Despite the song, I want to talk about me, I want to talk about I. It's not about me. Our faith tells us that we have to surrender ourselves so that we can truly be filled. And when we're on our phones, it's all about me, right? It's about me and that device, me about Mo, Larry, and Curly. And when we're on social media, it's me posting so that all the world can see what I am doing, so I can get all these likes, and then I can post some more stuff so I can get my dopamine up, so I can, have people like me and notice me. World religions, tell us, and Christianity is premier in that, in my opinion, talks about self-emptying because we follow a Lord who, as it says in Philippians 2, emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave, being obedient, taking on death on a cross. When we're tied to these devices that are just about me and whatever I'm viewing, that is not self-transcendent at all. That's about meeting our own needs, our own gratification, stirring up emotions within ourselves. Slow to anger, quick to forgive. When we're on social media, we are quick to judge what we see there. What do? Oh, I like that. Or I don't like that. Or if we're on some chat board, it's an upvote or a downvote. I've done that. I've been there. But we serve a God that it says in Psalm 103 that is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. And we're quick to make opinions when we are there by ourselves on the phone. We read something that pops through on our feed about something that's going on in the world, and we immediately make an opinion of it. And as Scott pointed out about dopamine, the news channels that are out there right now, the shock jocks that are broadcasting on both our smartphones, on social media, and on the airwaves, are there to stir up your anger to make money so that you can watch them, so that the advertisers can share with you what they're trying to sell. They are there using your anger to fuel your dopamine addiction, my dopamine addiction, to stir us up. And when that happens, we get angry quickly. How can they think that way? Who are these folks? What dummy would even say something like that or support something like that's going on? Been there? Well, in our religious traditions, we are to forgive. We are to, as Dr. King said, maintain a capacity to forgive. For he, as he said, is devoid of that capacity, is devoid of the capacity to love. So, in some ways, what our devices are doing is keeping us from loving. That's hard to hear because our faith is about love. Because, as it says in 1 John, God is what? Social media, shock jock, angry? God is love. And finally, finding all in nature. Scott shamed me today while I was working on my taxes. He was out taking an all walk out in nature. When we are on our phones, and even if we're seeing some cool stuff, I mean, oh wow, look at those waterfalls. Aren't they beautiful? And there's even some neat music on it, but the waterfall is the size of your phone. You're not experiencing the true power and wonder and glory of it. Example of this. Any of y'all been to Niagara Falls? Yeah, a lot of y'all have. I went a couple summers ago, and it sure felt a lot different going on that boat where the water was crashing down on us than seeing Niagara Falls, even taken from a drone shot with some fancy music playing, than actually being there. It's the same with anything in creation. Haidt talks about in his book, his students, he assigned them daily all walks going out into the parks in New York City. And there's some beautiful parks in New York City. They hadn't noticed it because here's how they were walking around like this, seeing any students doing that around town. Y'all, we live in one of the most beautiful places in all of America and indeed the world. There's so much that can stir awe within us. But our phones keep our eyes focused in on a small little screen rather than the grandeur of the mountains all around us. We build resilience by seeing something that's far greater than ourselves and our tiny problems that we go through each and every day. Next slide, please. I threw this in here on Scott because a few weeks ago, I went to a workshop on developing a resilient church. Boone UMC people, you hear more about that later. But in the workshop, it talked about the positive childhood experiences to build resilience or to overcome difficulties. It's from The Lost Connections by Johann Hari. And here they are. I'll just go through them real quickly. It's shared feelings with family members. It is a sense of belonging, in-person support during negative times, a sense of security and protection that is developed by relationships, a supportive, friendly community around you, community traditions, and 2 non-parental adults. It hit home to me because it made me realize that from my own late teenage years, young adolescence, my dad was in a bad car accident, and it sent our family into shock. It was just me and my mom at home at the time. My older siblings were already off doing their own thing. And what got me through that, as I reflect upon it a few years later, are these things. My mom and I could share with one another. We had a feeling of belonging in the Mary Esther United Methodist Church. We had Pastor John Carmichael that was at the hospital room each and every day, and he took me under his wing, and he cared for me. I felt secure and protected, even though I didn't know if my dad was going to live. He spent a whole month in ICU because of the people that were around me and the calls of support, and my friends that would come and pick me up, and their family members that say, hey, why don't you have Eddie come over for dinner that night? That's what they called me back then. Yeah. I had friends that loved on me and cared for me and were just loving on me, and we went out and played together. We had community traditions. Yeah, we're at church twice on Sunday and once on Wednesday. And 2 non-parental adults, that's what really hit home to me. I had 2 men that I still keep in contact with. One of them is my scout leader, a guy named Larry Weaver, who I admired greatly. He's an Air Force helicopter pilot. And my youth leader, a guy named Ben Pate, who was a Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force. All with me in person. Note, friends, that has nothing to do with social media. It's about being together with individuals and in community that care for each other, that help build resilience. And y'all, every child is going to have something bad happen, some difficulty, some more than others. But they have to have these things to make it through. Next slide, please, Sam. This is a famous verse from Romans. It's a theme for what we did as a congregation as we talked about the digital fast. But here's the key line there. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. As Scott talked about, because he got his brain sucked out by a phone for a while, it was hard for him to have his mind renewed. It's the same with me. I know that. I've had my share, as you heard me say, about Instagram. We have to have things in front of us that will transform our minds to be renewed into the mind of Christ. Next slide. So, we as a congregation are proposing for the 40 days of Lent to do a digital fast. We're using this book by Darren Whitehead as a guide for us. What is Lent? For those of you that aren't familiar with it, real quickly, it's the 40 days from Ash Wednesday, which is this past Wednesday, that lead us up to Easter. It's a time of spiritual preparation, imitating Christ 40 days in the wilderness. It's a time where Christians around the world do things to help them be more in tune with God. And as we said last week, it is trying to get us to our original state of who we are as human beings, of being in communion with God all the time. So we're trying to do away with distractions in things that keep us from focusing in on God and doing things that help us focus in on God. It started on March 5th. And so people fast on all sorts of things. People fast from food. They say they abstain from candy, they do, give up alcohol, they, give up red meat. There's different things we do. But next slide, please. We in our faith community are doing a digital fast, which will help us focus in more on God and on spiritual practices and not so much on the distractions of our phone. And here's what we're posing. Avoid social media. Do away with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, Twitter, all those other things. Making your smartphone dumb. That means make it like you are. No, just make it like me. Making it dumb. Make it a flip phone. Move everything on your phone that you can do on your computer. Move everything off your phone you can do on your computer. Remove the distraction apps, social media, news, games, videos, shopping. Keep the utility apps. These things are called phones. So, keep that on there. Keep your texting on there, your maps, weather, calendar, camera. Limit your digital technology to certain times of the day. I know it's hard for me. I mean, I'm one of those that I get an email, I'm going to respond right away, all that type of stuff. Limit it to maybe do a time in the morning, time in the evening. Take a fast day from even doing that. Turn off your notifications. Turn off the little ping that will happen when the texts come, when the emails arrive. Turn those things off. Here's something that was interesting for me this morning, is removing the phone from your bedside table and getting an old-fashioned alarm clock. Well, it's been years since I've set an alarm clock, Scott, and we've had, what happened today, daylight savings time, and that was kind of interesting, but we did make it work, right, Patty? We did get up on time, but most Americans have their phones 6 feet from them at all times. Think about that, all times. So plug your phone in somewhere in the front room, bring your book back with you in your bed. Set phones to grayscale, and if I can figure it out, you can. So it makes it a lot less appealing. And what about other screen? Well, one more comment before I get to that. When Scott and I were talking about this, we were saying, do things like you did when you were a kid. Think about all the things you did as a kid. You read, as Scott said. You played board games with your family members. You did things out of doors. You picked up some new hobbies. So consider fasting for this season from TV, except for the NCAA tournament, from gaming, tablets, at least for certain days. Next slide, please. Just real quickly, the first 10 days you're learning how to detach, and it's hard. It is hard, y'all. I've been slowly weaning myself off several things off my phone, and it takes some time, because you're instant. Well, what's going on here? Let's see what's news. Let's see what's going on with a certain sports team. It's hard when you've taken those things off and they're no longer there. It takes some detox. What do you notice as you're doing this? What are you discovering the next 10 days? What are you trying to engage in? Some new hobbies, new habits. How are you delighting joy in your life? And then at the end of the Lenten season, what are you going to pick back up? And what are you going to permanently take off from your phone and from your life so that you can be more in tune with God, with yourself, with your fellow human beings? Next slide, please. We've got a lot time for questions, don't we, Scott? Before, we were going to ask them to break up into small groups, and we still hopefully can do that. But what questions do you all have for us? Okay, it's a good idea. Scott says he feels an anxiousness in the room because you haven't looked at your phones for 36 minutes.
I mean,
Yeah.
we definitely want to engage with some questions.
Yeah, we do.
But I think it'd be helpful, just everybody's been saying, let's just take a 5-minute break. Yeah. Hey, Sam, would you mind flipping over to the next slide for us? All right, gang. After talking about all the importance of social connections, I'm stopping the social connections here. Guys, what we'd like for you to do is to spend the next few minutes talking amongst yourselves about what questions you had from the presentation that we did on the anxious generation. And we really would like to have a chance to have some dialogue and for you to ask questions. But if you guys could do that in a few minutes, we'll start walking around with a microphone to answer your questions. But if you could have someone at your table responsible for writing the questions down and then just prioritize the questions that you have so that when it comes time for your table to ask a question, you guys have that prioritized. So talk amongst yourselves and we'll start passing the mic around here in a few minutes. All right, guys, we're gonna get started with some questions. Cameron, it's your time to shine.
Yeah.
So if we're just going to try to go table to table. If your top question gets asked, just move on to your next question. But we'll try to keep this moving, and hopefully this will be a good, engaging conversation. Table 1. Yes, sir.
Where do you start? Particularly, we were talking about the addiction of social media.
Yeah.
And we observed, as you did, the difference in how our daughter interacts and feels that addiction differently than our son.
Yeah.
You try to take the phone away, it becomes a fight.
Yeah.
Which then creates other conflicts.
Yeah.
So where do you start with even that bedtime routine, or just helping your teenager to make decisions about beginning that weaning process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's an entire 2 chapters about girls and boys in there, by the way, if you want to read more, and why social media is a bigger problem for girls and why gaming is a bigger problem for guys. So if you want more, dive in. I think in terms of what I do and say in the office, my number one piece of advice to everybody is get away from your phones at nighttime. So if you were going to start a place, it'd be putting the phones away from your bed and creating a new morning and night and morning ritual that did not involve your phone. And give yourself, your brain, a chance to detach before you go to bed. So I think particularly when I'm talking to teenage patients, that's like right up there at the very, very top. I think the other thing too is this all comes down, I think, to personal parenting style too. But at least what we did with our kids is we had a fairly robust and strict contract that was very favorable to our terms. I would say entirely favorable to our terms. And their usage of said phone needed to abide by the contract for it to continue to be used. So I think everybody can do it a little bit differently, but I do think having explicit conversations and contracts for kids who you are paying for the right and privilege to use it is a very good thing to think about. And that's something that we did do with our kids that we found to be really, really helpful. But I think one starting place, that would be an absolute starting place, would be the start of the nighttime stuff. Yep.
Okay, this table over here was asking what physical aspects, what physical ramifications have you seen due to phone use, and particularly as it pertains to obesity and kids being overweight?
Yeah, I mean, when you just start running all of those different scenarios out, when kids are spending that much time on the phones, it just crowds out your ability to do anything else. And so there's less physical activity, all that kind of stuff. And so along with sleep deprivation, headaches, abdominal pain, the list goes on, as you can imagine. With kids are less active, getting less sleep. There's all sorts of physical manifestations that go along with that as well. So, but yeah, that comes up quite a bit when we're dealing with some of the chronic issues around headaches, stomach aches, and that kind of thing.
Is the radiation really
The radiation, I haven't seen as much about the radiation. I think the main thing I would think about is less like the exposure to the device, is that device is blocking you from being able to experience life that's going on around you, is what I would be worried about.
Okay, once distracted, could be from a use of a phone or text. What is the research on how long it takes to re-engage and focus, fully focus?
What was the first part on distraction?
Okay, so you're distracted.
Uh-huh.
Maybe a student has gotten a text, they read the text. What's the amount of time it takes to get back on task, fully engaged?
Oh, I don't know. That's a great question. Like once you get a text, how long does it take you to get back? I don't know if I know any of the data on that, but again, even when they're not responding, they're thinking about responding, and it's just grabbing more of their attention. And so part of it is just having time away from the phone where you're not having to not only receive text, but think about responding to texts and all the different things that come at you. It's a great question. I don't know if I know the data well enough to be expert on that.
We were wondering how we can help to create those groups of people who will have the same thoughts and ideas as we do about social media, gaming, how many days a week they can do it. Like, how do we do that with kids who already have devices, and then also with our younger students who aren't old enough yet?
Yeah, that's a great. He spends some time talking in there because I think one of the things he envisioned in writing this book is places like us having this conversation tonight. And one of his little phrases he has is speak up and link up. So I think the speak up is, if you are feeling this way about how devices are impacting you or how you would like for them to not impact your kid or to impact your kid, I would say speak up. And then the link up part is, once you speak up and start finding people who are thinking about them in ways that you are, reach out to them, have a meal with them, have coffee, ask them what they're doing. Maybe you have 5 other families you're going to get to have a meal. But I think part of it is you're going to have to start thinking and speaking about how you're feeling about this and finding other people who are sympathetic. And go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kelly, we're in a church that is doing that very thing right now. And so it would be awesome for your Sunday school class, your small group, that those of you that are, if you don't have one yet, find some as parents and saying, we're going to do this together in the community of faith. And if you're not a part of this community of faith, you can find people that are going to do this. But that's one of the reasons why we're doing the digital fast, is that will empower parents to say, hey, a lot of folks in Boone UMC are doing this. We're going to do this together. Kids, these are the ground rules we're going to set for that for this period of time. So that's one of the great things about being together. So thank you.
So I was wondering if there was any data, which is probably like person dependent, but if there's like an average of time that it takes for children to increase their attention once the device is taken away, or they're spending more time away from a device.
Like, how long does it take to reset? Is that sort of the question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll probably answer that in one way and then also answer a common question I get in our office. But one of the things that I really wanted to have this conversation within the framework of the digital fast, because I wanted this embedded in a deeper thought about what we're doing with our devices. Because Ann Lemke, one of the Stanford psychologists, Dopamine Nation, it basically takes about 30 days to disconnect from something before you start forming their own neural pathways. And that's why I think it's amazing we're doing a 40-day Lenten fast. But your brain will start to operate differently and lay down new pathways of operation probably in about 30 days. But it takes about 30 days to like reset itself from how it was doing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we know that it's a 28-day period for any new behavior. And so it takes 4 weeks basically for, as he said, the neural pathways to develop. But we just know that from experience from all sorts of of behaviors and addictions that if you can go 28 days, you are well on your way to making it. Now, of course, the relapses and things like that, but that's what Height said and some other things that I've seen, and of course, doing stuff like this in community too.
I think another common question that comes up is like, how much is too much with the phone? You know, is it like 0, 1, 2, 7 seems like a lot? Like, where's the line? A lot of the data is showing that somewhere around 2 hours is where you really start to see, 2 hours per day on the phone, you start to see a significant increase in anxiety and depression. So that's not for everybody. Everybody's a little different. And part of it is, what are you doing during that 2 hours? Are you talking on the phone with your friends and texting, or are you spending 2 hours scrolling TikTok? That's going to be a whole different experience. But that's a number in there that gives you a ballpark that's not definitive, but at least a ballpark.
The average American, adult kids, average American is 4 hours and 25 minutes on the phone. So we spend a lot of time, and there's the anxieties there amongst adults. It's not just kids.
Yeah.
Okay, our question at our table was, we were wondering how to discuss this matter with adult children raising teenagers today.
Ooh.
Wow.
It's getting spicy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Phyllis, hand them the book and then walk out. Actually, just talk about what we're doing here and some of the things that we know about, hear about. There's all sorts of articles. The handouts that we have here at the church can be helpful for those conversations. But when they sure seem to get a lot smarter than we are when they leave the house, right? So they think they know what they're talking about. But I think they are seeing intuitively too what's going on. We're not the only place having this conversation. But yeah, have the conversation. And of course, as grandparents sometimes get accused of doing, they get to be meddling. But yeah, just talk to them about what we're talking about here tonight.
Everybody's family dynamics are so different. But
Absolutely.
I think the main thing is have the conversation, and don't even necessarily worry that the conversation has the exact right content about it, but that you are talking about it and bringing it up. And hopefully it's a door to a second conversation, a third, and an ongoing dialogue about it would be what I would hope that you try to develop.
That's a good word, ongoing dialogue.
Oh, well, I want to say again, Scott, that I really think this should be done at every elementary school in Watauga County between now and the end of the semester, so that next fall it's a no-phone school system. I mean, unless people get joined together, as you made the point, if I tell my kid that you can't be on the phone, that's a losing battle, because he's going to say every other kid's got a phone. So it's got to be hundreds of people that are going to have to do this.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, and I think you are welcome. He talks a lot in this book about the idea of collective action problems and how much easier it is to do things together than it is individually. And as you could just sense the enormity of what we're talking about, this definitely takes a lot of people working together to make it work. If you haven't been keeping up in the news, this is news in our pediatrics world. Our state legislators working on a couple bills in the House and Senate on phone-free schools and sending it back to the communities to do that. So I think you're going to be hearing more about that. And I think figuring out a way to have constructive dialogues with our, community school leaders is great to make sure we craft something that really works well for our kids and families. So
It's me. So the guidelines that that were shared in the slides, no phone until 9th grade and no social media until 16. So what if you have a child who's 12 and hasn't gotten a phone or social media, and another child who maybe already has passed that? And how do you go back?
Yeah, how do you go back? It's a great question, a really challenging one. I mean, so I know people saw those slides and were like, okay, we're not doing that, and it feels very uncomfortable, and now I feel like I'm not following regulations, and now I feel even worse. That's not the point of that. But I do think I would just encourage you to step back and say, all right, where do we want to be as a family? And it might be changing the rules that you already had based on new information that came your way. And that's okay, as you're right as a parent to change your mind. And if you do that and you back it up and it changes for the older one, that's going to be uncomfortable. But it may be what you guys decide you need to do. So I think everybody needs to decide that for themselves. But I think, again, I have been in the trenches of parenting. You start out, you think you know what you want to do, and then a lot of what you do as a parent is you're in the flow of the stream. I mean, it just is. You're in the flow of the stream. And I think part of hopefully what we're doing tonight is like, okay, let's get out of the stream for a minute and figure out what I actually want to be doing right now. And then once you figure out what you're going to do, there's probably going to be some uncomfortable conversations. And again, when I say this, it's like, oh, easy for you to say. We've had these uncomfortable conversations around my dinner table. Cameron can attest. She can attest. She's given a yes, so I've been there. But I'd figure out what you want to do, and then it might be changing what you're currently doing, and those are hard. That's the art as opposed to the science of parenting there.
Okay, our table really kind of wants to know how we help our kids who are on all sorts of devices. How do we help them discern what information is real and what is not real, what is true and what is, because a lot of the anxiety I think that kids feel, they're paying attention to things that are not real. So how do we help them discern
what is real and not real?
Yeah, what is true and what's not true?
Trusted news sites, which are becoming fewer and fewer far between, is part of that. It's doing your own research. I was a journalist before I entered into ministry, is for the military, and I think a class on what journalism and news is ought to be offered at some point. But that's a hard question, Peggy, because we're surrounded by so much now. And is teaching critical thinking, is this really something that, does shaking hands really cause cancer, Scott? I mean, that's what I read on the internet, so I know it's true. How we do those type of things, that's a community project. That is a project of all of us. It's just not something that we do as parents, and just individual parents, but it's also looking at the stuff that our kids are exposed to on TikTok or whatever, or the Three Stooges channel. What is that thing I watch? Instagram. And using filters that you set up on your own and saying, guys, I don't think we ought to be doing that. And you can do filters on phones, if you so choose to do that.
I think it's a great question. I think the irony of the moment we find ourselves in is in the moment we are most able to be connected to people because of devices is the time when people feel most lonely. And at the time when you have the most knowledge available to you in your pocket right this second, we lack the wisdom to know what to do with the knowledge that comes across the phone. It's a problem. I don't have a simple answer to it, but it's a problem that an overabundance of information that may or may not be true creates. And part of it is how do we help develop wisdom? So let's use some biblical language. How do we develop wisdom in our lives and help our kids develop wisdom? Great question.
You're right, Scott. It's no easy answer.
No easy answer there, but that is a terrific question.
And as I said earlier in the presentation, a lot of what's out there is driven to cause us to be angry because it sells. And we're being addicted to our anger, and the people are making money off of that. So we've got to ask ourselves, is this stuff that's being said really, really true? Or is it being presented in such a way that there may be a thread of truth of it, but it's there to stir up emotion? And that's on all sides of the spectrum of politically. It's not just one side or the other.
So, as a grandparent,
Yes.
I'm watching my adult children make a decision for their younger child, and they have 3 older children in the home. So the decision is to take the smartphone away from one of them and give a lesser phone, and the older ones keep it. I think that's very difficult to negotiate as I listen to the conversations, and I've been asked to bring some of this information back to them. So any suggestions, because that's one child that's going to be treated age appropriate, but differently because they've already had the smartphone.
So again, sort of what to do once somebody in the family already has one and there's other people that may be affected. Is that Cameron?
Sir. Sorry, I wasn't clear. The 3 older children will keep their smartphones. The younger child will have to go to a lesser phone and not have a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a difficult thing for my granddaughter to negotiate.
Yes.
She's already hurt. I
Yeah.
can just tell you that. It's a deep wound. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on that. And I've been asked to bring information back to them.
Again, I think this is these are challenging issues, particularly once you've sort of already, again, in the stream, gotten to a spot, but then you're uncomfortable with the spot you find yourself in. Okay, so I get that. Partly I'll just share, like within our own family, what we did. Okay, we let our kids get flip dumb phones that had a sliding keyboard in 8th grade. And as it typically happens with kids, the older one didn't get a smartphone until he went off to college. Our middle one got one at 16, and our daughter got one at 15. So if you have kids, you know how those things sort of tend to like filter down a little bit. But that's what we decided to do. And then we had them all basically stay away from social media when they were in high school. When you have the situation where someone already has one, that's just I wish I could be, I'm not going to be flippant about, oh, just take it away. But I do think if you figure out what you want your family standard to be, then it's about having good and honest conversations and figuring out this is the standard we're going from here, and this may involve changes for people. Those are difficult conversations, and I wish I had an easy way to have those.
Or the glory of being the youngest child.
Yes, the glory of being the youngest child, where everything sort of shifts. I say that as an oldest child, where everything was always strict for the oldest.
Yeah,
so.
I got the car in college.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Hello. We had a lot of really good conversation at our table, but one of our questions is, what effects have you seen from kids who use devices as toddlers and preschoolers? For example, have you seen effects in their behavior and especially their social emotional development?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I've been around long enough to remember when the Einstein videos came out. Anybody? Einstein videos? It's gonna be great, man. You just plug in the Einstein videos, they're going to Harvard, and this is like simple. What we found is that digital devices do not lead to good childhood development. Interacting with human beings and other kids do. That's sort of the short answer. So I do think one of the things that we do see in our office is when kids are feeling stressed, their immediate thing is, I need a device to sort of help me calm down. And we know as an adult, that's just not a great way to go about your life, is you got to have that device to like settle. So that would be one thing. And the second thing is, we've got educators in this room. I do think one of the challenges we're currently facing is the younger kids get enmeshed in the devices. It is about entertainment. And so anything you learn has to be entertaining. And everybody in here knows that ain't how it works. And so once they get this idea that everything has to be entertaining to be worth my time, man, school becomes really, really challenging then. So I probably didn't answer it well, but particularly in the younger ages, they need so much physical human contact, and the screens just can't do that. Jeremy.
Yes, Scott, question for those of us with preteens who do not yet have their own phones, but want to communicate with their friends outside of school who are scattered throughout the county. Curious what healthy and creative recommendations you have for such.
In terms of how to connect?
Yeah, we want to give them the independence and the ability to communicate with their friends at the appropriate degree.
In sort of the preteen?
Preteen.
Yeah.
Preteen, pre-phone.
Yeah. I mean...
And kids are spread out.
Sure. I do think it is a challenge, but I think the main thing would be figuring how to get them together in some connected way, in a consistent way that just has them together. And, if they don't have a phone, it's going to be calling, but having consistent ways where we're meeting at the park to do this, we're, older, we're meeting at the basketball courts to do that, but that we have some consistent ways where we're connecting and meeting up in person. And a lot of it may have to be filtered out through parents if they're that young, and just have some consistent ways to meet up together in the community. But again, I think this is sort of where it is a community problem, because if hey, on Tuesday afternoons, this group of my friends, they always meet at the park. I can just show up. Awesome. I mean, for a lot of us who grew up, that was how it was. It was like, oh, that was the time when everybody just showed up and you just did it. There's a lot less of that. But that, again, gets back to the collective action. Are there other parents to say, hey, Tuesday's the day we're just going to meet and everybody's going to run around and play Frisbee golf over at the Greenway or whatever? So
I was going to be snarky and say just pick up the phone and call. But, I mean, easier said than done.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
We spend a lot of time talking about the need for us to do this together, that it's really hard to do this in a silo. And when you have a community group to do it with, like our church, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah.
And we wanted to focus a lot on, and ask you, how do we encourage the community leaders to address this, to make changes specifically in schools, but other community areas as well?
How do we impact sort of local education and school stuff?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot myself. I do think, I think there's probably going to be a pretty ripe time to do this, particularly if the legislature is sort of forcing all local educational places to have their own plan in place by next school year. I think that's likely going to happen the way this last bill was overwhelmingly bipartisan. I think that's going to be it. And I do think there's some positive ways to do that in a way that is kind and respectful, and also expressing our parental opinions about what we'd like to do. And I would like and hope our church could be a helpful facilitator to have this conversation, what we'd like to look about. But I do think, we're going to have to be advocates for our kids to create educational spaces that are good for them. And how we do that, I'd love to be part of those conversations. I'd love for our church to be part of those conversations.
And we have school board members that are part of our congregation.
Church, yeah.
So we can have those conversations
Totally.
with those individuals.
Totally.
So I'm in high school, and I deal with a lot of my friends and peers having major screen addictions, and I was just wondering how I can influence them in a positive way.
How they have what? I'm sorry, I missed a part of that. That's great.
That they're really addicted to their phones.
They're really addicted to their phones. How can you have a positive impact on? Well, first off, I really appreciate your heart in trying to be a positive impact on your peers. So thank you. I think a lot of this has a collective action part to it, but what you're asking is, what can I do at an individual level day to day? I think part of it is we can take our little small spheres of influence and model new ways of reconnecting with our devices. So I will tell you, if you're a high school student and you leave your phone in your book bag and you show up at the lunchroom and don't have your device out and are engaging people in conversation, That will be countercultural. That will be good. That will be noticed. That will be noticed. That will be different. And it's going to be small acts like that of you taking the initiative to do that, to be present and engaged, I think will be really noticeable to your friends. So kudos for
Thank you,
that
Matt.
question. Yes.
And I know that the youth group here, they're working towards that, so you'll have a community of people that will be doing that together.
Totally.
And, you know, one person influences another, and next thing you know, there's no phones in the lunchroom. Wouldn't that be cool?
I just had a quick comment. We're seeing, just based on what I do for work, we're seeing a pretty significant increase in the burden of myopia or nearsightedness in our younger children that can be pretty directly tied to the significant increase in screen time. So somebody had asked about physical manifestations. So that is one consideration as well.
Peter's an ophthalmologist, so he would know way better than I would. But I didn't know that, but that totally makes sense to me, for sure. Is this phone? As everybody? This group? Yeah. Okay.
That's the benefit of going last. You get all your questions answered.
Yeah. Y'all are good.
You're good.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to get my, 75-year-old parents to follow this.
It's a multi-generational issue, is what you're saying.
It is.
It is. And sometimes the devices look different, but it is an issue. I think one of the things we're over time and we want to respect people's time. One of the things we would like for you guys to do is, if you're interested in being part of more of these conversations, whether it's around what to do with the school board, et cetera, we have a spot there on the table for you to leave your email that we can connect with you.
It's on the blue piece of paper.
It's on the blue piece of paper. But also, if you have other ways that you feel like our church can be supportive of you in helping make these decisions, please let us know what they are. If you feel like our church could be supportive in further events like this, please let us know what they are. And if you write them on the blue sheet, we're going to collate all those together and sort of figure out where do we go from here. So I'm really glad you guys were here. I realize we just skimmed across the surface. I realize it's probably going to prompt a ton of questions on the drive home and from here. But I'd love for our church to continue to be part of this conversation. It may look different than it is tonight, but please write those on the blue sheet so we can sort of know where people are and how we can be helpful.
Also on the sheet is an email address. You have questions or comments or things that you want to share about how we can help. As far as the digital fast goes, we've run out of these books. We're going to order some more, but we have 2 opportunities throughout the week to meet for having conversation on how it's going and support one another in this. I'm leading a group on Tuesdays at lunch, so bring something semi-healthy to eat, and we'll gather in the conference room. If we're out there, we'll find a different room. And then on Thursday evenings at 5:30, come for supper, take your meal, and join Laura Birch in the conference room. Or again, if that space isn't adequate, we'll find another room. But as you heard, we need each other in this for our kids, our grandkids, but also for each other, because as you know, we all have troubles with these phones if you have one. I mean, we do. Heard me say about Instagram. I mean, me, Mo, Larry, and Curly were great friends for several months. It is an issue, and I know for a fact in my own life, as I've pulled away from it, I still have this urge to say, oh, let's see what's going on here. Oh, let me check the phone as I'm walking down the hallway. It's hard, y'all. The phones were designed to addict us. That's a proven fact. A proven fact. So they also distract us from life, from each other, from God. So let's help one another. Yes, ma'am. Name's Benjamin? Benjamin.
Why don't you pray for Benjamin and then close us in prayer?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. And again, thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a gift that this church has offered to you. Again, I want to thank Dr. Scott St. Clair. This is, in many ways, his vision for what we are doing. And I just want to thank you, Scott, for you organizing this for us. I want to say also that we were asked if this is going to be live streamed, and Scott rightly pointed out that kind of defeat the purpose, you know. But it is recorded, and it will be posted to the church's Facebook page, though we're telling people not to go on Facebook, as well as our YouTube channel. So tell people about that. How else can we get it out there?
It is. I think Vern's also going to turn it into a podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be on a podcast. So all these things we're telling you not to do, that's how you can hear about it. But that's the age we live in, right? I mean, these things have become necessary in a lot of ways. Because, as I joked the other day about using this thing for our getting around with the maps, I mean, you try to ask anybody for directions anymore, what are they going to say to you? Well, dude, go on Google Maps. I mean, we do need these things. They're part of our lives, but it's not letting them control us is what we are after. So, again, thank you all for coming out. Let's pray for Benjamin, and then let's pray for us to go in God's peace. Lord, loving God, we pray for Benjamin right now. Pray for his family, that somehow, some way they could come together in love. Even there is some brokenness there. We pray that you are God who mends our brokenness and mends the woundedness in our lives. And we pray that Benjamin will go on a path that is right and good and true, that he is able to find you as he seeks after you. And Lord, we just pray your protecting hand upon him to remove all things that would endanger him, that would enslave him, that would addict him, and help him move forward at a future that you intend for him, that's bright and good, full of promise to fulfill your great dream for his life. Thank you for his mother being here tonight, and we pray that something she has heard this evening will help her in her role as being a mama. Now, God, we thank you for all the mothers and the fathers, the grandparents, the concerned citizens that are in this place. May something that has been said move each of us forward into the future that will help us to be more attuned to you as we're less attuned to our electronic devices. More attuned to the beautiful world that you've placed around us rather than viewing things on a screen. And most especially, Lord, more attuned to one another. Beautiful sons and daughters of yours, images of yours walking around on this earth. Help us, God, to see one another in the light of your love, so that as we go forth in the world, we're more united together, so that your good love can be made known through the people in this congregation, but yes, all who are here can somehow, some way be expressions of your divine love in this world. Thank you for Scott. Thank you for his vision for this. We pray that what you have placed on his heart will become a reality as more and more individuals are free from their phones, free from the addictions that these phones have caused, and more able to live in the fullness that you call us all to live into. Now, God, we pray that you would guide and direct us all once we leave this place. We ask this in Christ our Lord.